the decision to see a psychologist was definitely one of the best decisions that I think I've ever made, because it's not something that you forget. I think it's something that stays with you, and it sort of empowers you, having that mental strength to say, you know what, like, you do your best in certain things, but I think it's like, I feel like it's hard for me to almost go back to that, because I find a lot of people, even now as I'm a professional actor, a lot of people will tell me, you know, like, Chase, if this didn't work out, would you be stressed? Or they will often ask me, they're like, how do you kind of go about doing things very relaxed and free? You seem to have a lot on the line. And I always tell them, I say, like, let's say if it doesn't work out, like, what is really, like, let's say 8 months wasted, 1 year wasted, like, it's not the end. That's like the worst case, like the absolute worst case. And I'm like, honestly, that's not even that bad. So I'm like, if whatever else happens in between, it's going to be a fraction of that. And I think, so it's very hard for me to, I find now, get myself so riled up to the point where I stress myself out. And I, a lot of my friends, I could see that they're very like, you know, they like it's almost like everything is a life and death. And I know that when I was at that state, it's a very scary place to be at, you know? So I think having people like you, you know, who bring so much value in sort of centering people mentally, I think is so crucial. And I think, I just wish that more people would be, you know, open to make psychology like part of a, if you want to say, like, I think there's a certain level of normality to it that I think is important, because our mind's playing a lot of games with us. And I think you need somebody to sort of center it and ground it and say, hey, listen, like, let me just clearly sort of lay out what's going on in your mind so that you can see things very clearly. Because I think for us, we make it so messy that if we were to draw a picture of it, it's a big mess, and it doesn't need to be like that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I always appreciate people who value the profession and kind of advocate for that. Really, especially, I really think that there needs to be some parity with the medical profession in terms of that value, you know, even with salary or respect, I think, in hospital systems. And I even encourage people that don't have diagnoses or at that point where they can't function or it's impairing functioning, that if you have that luxury and you can talk to someone, everyone goes through stress, right? Having that extra support network or net can be helpful.
Definitely.
So I'm wondering, you're a big advocate of mental health, and that's kind of why we were in sync when I reached out to you. And I'm so glad that we kind of connected, because you're just such this warm person. Very
this positive. Won't be the only time, because I'm even thinking there's some people I want to refer over to you. And like, well, after today, I think I want to understand your, you know, your practice more in detail. I know today's more of a podcast, but I think, you know, like, speaking with you has been very warm and very comfortable. And I know there's a lot of people that I like how you have a certain level of kind of, if you want to say, sort of leadership, firmness quality to you that I think sometimes people need. They just need someone to say, hey, listen, like, kind of, I guess, clamp down and say, you know, this is, and I kind of like that. I think there's some people that I would love for you to connect with and see if they are able to utilize your services. Yeah.
How can we, from your perspective, because you have this platform, and how can we continue to destigmatize mental health and taking care of yourself, really?
Like, I've always kind of looked at life in general as a lot of different, if you want to call them like silos or categories. From, you've got your finances, you've got your physical health, you've got your relationship health, you've got your professional, and then obviously the mental health side. And I do believe that you do have to break things down to each little category, because I do think that when one thing's not going well, it could spill over onto the other. And I think, yeah, when things get worse, it's when there's more bad than good in terms of all the various categories. I've always seen it as, you know, we go to university to learn certain topics. And I think a lot of those topics probably aren't even as useful as what you would get through like working on your mental well-being. But I do think a lot of the different areas of your life, whether that's your finances, your relationship, you do have to kind of one at a time work at that. Because if you don't, I think that's when it could potentially become something bigger. Because I can say is that, let's say if everything in your life is going very well, but you are always, let's say, behind financially, or like, let's say the bank's calling you all the time. Like, eventually that stress will bottle up. If, let's say, something happens, your car breaks down, you can't pay for it, or, you know, you have a medical emergency, or your teeth is like, rotting, you can't pay for. Like, these are real stresses. And
Yeah.
um, I do think that people have to kind of break things down to little bite-sized pieces and deal with it one at a time. And I think that overall will improve your mental health, because I feel like our minds are always being stimulated with a lot of different stressors. And I feel like things get stressful is when they're, if you want to say, out of control. So if your relationship is out of control, if everything is going well, but the person you live with is screaming at you every single day,
Yeah.
like, you need to deal with that. You can't just expect that one day will get better. Like, and I think that's the biggest thing, is that when people don't take that effort to one at a time improve things and say, hey, listen, I really should deal with this, because that's how things get bottled up and become like crazy. And I think, and I truly believe there is no mystery with that. I think it's a very common sense. It's almost like, if I were to put a pile of garbage in my kitchen, I do it for one day, maybe it's okay. If I do it to 2 days, it will start to smell. If I do it for 3 days, for sure maggots will come. And here's the thing: if I have garbage in my kitchen and maggots are growing and flies everywhere, there's no way I can enjoy my meal. There's no way I could actually live comfortably when I have a pile of garbage. And I do think the same concept is with all those different little categories in your life, whether, like I said, finance or relationship, is that when you don't clean it up, if you want to call it that, or deal with it, or work on it, I do think that it builds up, and it builds up to a point where it gets ugly, it gets messy, it gets uncontrollable, it gets overwhelming,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think people need to really see it like that, is that, like, mental health is a combination of a lot of little things that eventually become like this huge thing, and your mind can't deal with it. Yeah.
I like that
Yeah.
other visual as well. I never thought of it as garbage, but I as you were describing, I was like, oh my God, you're gonna get rats and who knows
Yeah,
what else is gonna
I
come.
know. And like, sometimes, stuff, like, I see certain people where, like, I find that their relationship with their partner, you could feel that it's not quite toxic, but it's very impatient, and it's very, you could sense the tension, and you could sense the hostility. And
Sure.
it's like literally minutes away from being very toxic. And I'm like, you need to kind of just stop everything you're doing. Don't worry about your job. Everything else could wait. You guys need to sort of sort something out where there's a certain level of effectiver communication. Because if you keep this up, it's like getting bigger and bigger. And this is where it's
Yeah.
like that first bag of garbage. Now you got the second bag. Eventually the rats are going to come. And when the rats come, they're going to eat your food, and they're going to poop everywhere, and you're going to hate your house. Yeah.
So I mean, like I said, I think it's very interconnected as you're talking about. And I
Mm,
think that's something to really drive home to people is that,
yeah.
the mind body is very, very connected. As you were talking about, physical
Yep.
manifestation, mental manifestation, and then it kind of spills over into other areas of your life, which
Yeah.
probably isn't good for you or the people
Yeah.
around you.
Steph, I'll tell you one thing very interesting, and I'm sure you're probably the exact same way, being a clinical psychologist. I remember when I was talking to the psychologist the second time, in 2015. I remember when I spoke with her, I presented her a lot of different ideas, right? And I think I had an assumption that she was going to say something along the lines of, like, think positive, and don't think, like, like that whole positive thinking, which I think there's certain truths to it, effectiveness. But I remember very clearly, she was very clear with me. She said, Chase, let me just tell you this. What you just told me, okay, if you don't deal with that, that's a real stress. She's
Yeah.
like, you have to understand, like, you losing this and this and this, not a big deal. But what you just told me there, she's like, if you don't deal with that, that's a big deal. She's like, you can't just like eat like crap every single, like, she's like, that's a real stress. She's like, you have to deal with it. And I remember that was kind of the difference, because I thought she was just going to be, don't let anything affect you. Whatever happens, happens. But I remember she was very particular. She's like, listen, if your bank account goes to zero and the bank goes and withdraws and it's insufficient, she's like, that is a real effing stress. She's like,
Hmm.
you need to make sure, like, you can't just let your bank account go to zero and like expect, happy thoughts and everything is good. She's like, because that's a real stressor. And she started naming off a lot of these, what you would call these stories we tell ourselves, where we
Yeah.
would we would make up, worst case scenarios.
Distortions. Yeah.
Exactly. And then she told me the real one. She's like, that one you got to deal with. Like, don't ignore that. All right. And she's like, the thing with your spouse, with your girlfriend, she's like, that same thing. She's like,
Yeah.
right now at home, if this is an issue, you have to understand that is a big deal too. And you've got to deal with that. And I think that was when I started to be very good with picking and choosing the things that I'm maybe over exaggerating, and then the important things. And I think it's allowed me these last few years to be very efficient in my acting career in terms of the things that I should put effort in and energy into. And then the things that if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. And that was the one thing I remember so clearly, because I kept thinking, I'm like, psychology is going to say, keep positive and don't let it
Yeah.
affect you. And I remember she's like, yep, what you just told me, if you don't deal with that, that will absolutely bring so much stress to your life. You will be overwhelmed. So
It'll
you
rip
need
you
to deal with
up.
it. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's when I started thinking, the finances, the relationship side, the health, these are real things. Because I remember, I think she was like, if you got cancer, do you think that's stressful? I'm like, well, if I'm really positive, she's like, you know what? That's pretty stressful. Like that's like your
Like, what
health.
are you talking about?
Yeah. So then, because I remember I was like, well, if I eat junk food every day, maybe I should be okay. She's like, well, think about it. If you were to do that every day, eventually you might get some health issues, and that's a real stress. You can't avoid that. You can't ignore that. You have to actually look after your health. And so that's when I was like, okay, there's certain things you've got to dedicate time to. So I know I kind of went off sidetrack.
No, it's not at all. I think what you're talking about is normalizing stressors, because while my Instagram promotes positivity, that's only one piece of it. Actually, in therapy, people are coming in for stress, anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
many times personality disorders. But it's not all think positive. It is, how can we examine maybe the way that you're thinking, your emotion regulation, and your social support or lack thereof is really impacting your ability to do the things that you want. What are your values? What is your behavior consistent with those values? So like you said, it might have been a value back then, or so you thought, to have a prestigious job with money and stuff like that. But you recognize that that's not the value that you wanted to keep. It's more of, can I do something that makes me feel genuine and authentic and excited about going to work? And that is not necessarily going into a corporate office and feeling like you're drowning, versus I'm going to take a step in this other pool and see where it takes me, because I'm really willing to take that calculated risk.
Definitely.
So how has your ability to cope with barriers, and you can kind of elaborate on maybe some of the barriers or things that pop up for you. How do you cope with it differently than before you went to therapy?
I think when you use that word calculated risk,
Risk, yeah.
I like that. I like the word calculated because I've always felt I would consider myself quite calculated in terms of the level of risk and in terms of like the decisions that I would make. So I would say in terms of coping with things right now, I always believe that whatever I am working towards, whether that's in acting or my, any other professional endeavors, I always tell myself is that for sure the effort will be there. I'm going to do my very, very best, but I'm also going to really look at how much can I extend myself? And if I extend myself, okay, I really always look at, I just like to kind of look at a worst case. Like I say, okay, if I extend myself like this, and if it doesn't work out, what will I lose? And I always tell myself, if the amount that I lose, I will lose a night of sleep, then I will dial down the risk. And I keep dialing down to a point where it won't affect me. And usually that envelope it's still quite deep in terms of how much I'm willing to push the envelope. So I think that's where I would dial it down to a level where I know even if I lost to the max, I won't lose 1 minute of sleep. And then it allows me, I think, the confidence to drive at 120 miles an hour. And I think being an actor, I'm often around a lot of actors. When I first started out, they were always asking me, they're like, Chase, you seem to be so cool and collective, even though you've got so much going on. And how do you sort of manage all this? And you have a certain level of, you're kind of not scared or you're almost fearless. And I tell them, I say, I don't think it's a matter of being fearless. I think there's a certain level of preparation where I have already prepared my mind thinking, okay, what is the worst? And then I literally go right to that. And I say, okay, if that did happen, would I lose any sleep? And if the answer is yes, I will lose sleep, I will kind of push it down a little bit. I say, okay, will I lose sleep? And the moment I realize it's a moment of, it's not that you don't care, but it doesn't affect you. And I think I'm very good at sort of calculating that and saying, how far do I extend my energy? How far do I extend my money? How far do I extend this personal connection? That kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think what you're speaking to is that you've internalized a lot of the work that you've done, because I don't
Yeah,
necessarily think that, everyone needs to write things on paper, but it sounds like those quick decisions are because you have a framework to really refer to.
definitely. Yeah, like you're absolutely right. The framework I think in my head is very, very solid. And I think I say no to a lot of things, not because not because I don't think they're worthwhile, but I
Sure.
think the framework in my head already knows where I need to spend my time. And I think yeah, I think it's just, I think maybe it's one of those things when you've done it so many times, eventually the process is a lot faster. You just can kind of within a few minutes make a quick decision, and most of the time it's aligned with what you know your your stress level can handle, I guess.
Yeah. Well, let's switch gears a little bit
Yeah.
to talk a little bit about your new role.
Mm.
Well, your role coming up that'll be released. I'm so excited for it.
Yeah, me
And
too.
I tried to look for your other movie because my mom was like, what is the movie called? I was hoping it was on Netflix, but tell us about this, about Jupiter's Legacy,
Yeah.
and working alongside like Josh Duhamel and Leslie Bibb and
Yeah.
Ben Daniels.
Yeah. So obviously Josh, Leslie, like they're like long-term Hollywood actors who've been at it for a long time. And I watched both of them like growing up, throughout like even before high school. So I remember, you know, uh coming to production, and when you see them like if like whether rehearsal or training and stuff like that, it was definitely a very, very surreal feeling, because you just, it's like you see somebody on TV for the longest time, and then now you get to see them live, and you shake their hand, you meet them. So it was, I think that for one, it took me a while to sort of wrap my head around that. Because I think even though I have been preparing for a long time to be an actor, and, and then to one day want to be a professional actor, I think there is still a certain level of like, you always kind of saw the people you saw on TV as like in a different world. Like they were the real people, the real
Yeah.
actors. And then, you're sort of, if you want to say up and coming, you're still trying to make a name for yourself. So I remember that was kind of, it was very, very a surreal feeling, and it took a little bit of adjusting to. And then after, I think during filming and after some initial press work, I think I started to get a little bit more comfortable, and then a lot of other opportunities came my way in Canada, a bit in Los Angeles, and then a lot in Taiwan. And I think at this point, I think there is I think it's now it's you do feel that, I don't ever want to say the word like you belong, as if it's like two different worlds, but I do
Mm-hmm.
think that now there is a certain level of comfort that I think you feel like you need to not only maintain, but I think there's a certain standard of, I think professionalism maybe is a better word. Yeah. So, but
Sure.
yeah, that was definitely a breakthrough in terms of, being in a major, studio show like that, and of such high budget. So it was, yeah, nothing but great things to say about that.
So I checked out your workout with Greg. Oh my
Oh,
God. And
yeah.
my my favorite part was, Chase, you need to lose 12 pounds. And I was like, this dude has like an 8-pack. What are you talking about, Greg? But he totally was giving you direct feedback of, well,
yeah,
Hollywood doesn't play. Like, let's go.
yeah, yeah,
Tell me about working with him and what
yeah.
you're doing during
So
quarantine.
that was so funny because like after we get off the call, Steph, I'm going to send you some pictures of when I in 2016 when I first came into acting. Obviously, the camera adds like a gazillion pounds on people. Like, I mean, not a gazillion, but probably a good 15, 20 pounds. It does make everyone look thicker. And I remember the first time I saw myself on camera, I was shocked. I was literally like this in acting class. I was I just froze, because I was like, I had no idea in the 26 years I look like that, right? Because when you see yourself in acting class, the camera, with the lighting, you just look very big. And I remember seeing a lot of skinny guys. They looked really ripped, and they looked really, like, not that they look good, but they look normal size, right? So I remember that moment. I was like, yep, I gotta lose weight, gotta lose weight. So then I started researching and like going on Google and YouTube, and then I came across Greg Gallagher's video, intermittent fasting and keto body, all that stuff. This was like back in 2006. Okay, so then I have a bit of a I'm a Virgo. Also have a bit of a, like, not an OCD, but that obsessive, like, where when you focus on something, you want to max it out and do it the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember I became like an expert in weight loss, and I really trimmed down a lot of weight. I remember a lot of people didn't recognize me who didn't see me for like 6 months. Like they literally didn't recognize, because when you lose a lot of body fat, it's not like photoshopping. It's your whole face, your body, everything just it changes in a way that you can't imagine, because we only think about fat and skinny as if like you take a fat person, you Photoshop them down, but they still look like, they just look like a skinnier version. But when you really lose fat, everything changes, from your complexion to your face, everything. So I remember I lost a tremendous amount of weight, and then literally about 3 years later, around 2019, I was in downtown Toronto one day, and I saw this young guy walking on the street. And I recognized him. It was Greg O'Gallagher. So this was about last year. And we were both so busy that we didn't get a chance to connect. And then literally because of COVID, obviously the world has changed. So then we reconnected, and I was like, hey, listen, we could do some co-branding. So we decided to do that little video. Like, I kind of lend him my fan base, and he lends me his platform, and we do a little kind of a workout together kind of thing. And the thing is, like during that time, I did eat way too much ice cream, way too much. For average people, I think they can tell I still have like an 8-pack, but I think for the standard of me and Greg, we both, we're both like ultra, like Virgo, like really detailed, like nitpicky. So for us, we're like, yeah, that's not good enough. And so that's what that was about. So it was just, I followed his program like 3 years prior, ran into him randomly in downtown Toronto 3 years later. And then about 8 months later, we decided to shoot that workout video. Yeah.
Isn't that so weird
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
like fate, whatever you want to call it, it was so serendipitous that day.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a coincidence that he came up with that workout program called Movie Star. And then it happened that, he always referenced Hollywood and stuff. So just happened that I had a little bit of clout with Hollywood and stuff. So it kind of worked out. It was a nice
So
little
cool.
tagline.
So, one of the quotes that you love is that you are I'm paraphrasing here, the author of your own story. So what's next in your chapters or in the immediate pages?
I think like obviously get like bigger movies, bigger TV shows. That's, I think that's always going to be in the background. But I think in terms of the next chapter, like I would love to be able to have my platform be much, much larger, like, and to a point where people, they don't know me as an actor, but they know me as somebody who, not that they know my name, but they know my story. And then they say, oh, wow, like his story is so random. And then from that, it gives a certain level of inspiration. So I would say like that would be, like in terms of like the next step or whatever in my story, I would just love when people think about me, they immediately refer to sort of my story and my background, and thinking that, what, this guy was so random. He literally like was a hockey player, and then he worked in the corporate world, and then he left that and then decided to pursue acting when he was like super old. And then like, it made a little bit of an
You're
influence.
not even that old.
Well, when I first started acting, you'll be surprised. Agents are like, you're crazy. You're like 27, 28. You want to go into acting? They're like, kids start acting when they're like 19, right? And you're like only 11 years older than that age. And yeah, so I would say, yeah, I didn't think I was old. If I thought I was old, I think I wouldn't make it. But a lot of the agents did tell me at that time, they're like, yeah, you're like, it's really late. Like you're just starting now and you got to learn everything from scratch. So, but yeah, I would say, I think just being a big inspiration, because I think this world, Steph, from what I see, it's just filled with too many people that I think are very stressed out. Yeah. They're very unfulfilled. I feel like their head is always down. And I think the way technology is today, and the way, like, if you think about it, Steph, like we could be like so close by me just bringing my face to the camera, and like we're face to face. Like, can you imagine if this technology is available 20 years ago? I would think that I'd be like, you're crazy. I'd be like, that's astronaut. That's like NASA technology.
Or even the cell phones that we have now.
I know. And like you think about grocery deliveries, to Uber, to all you can eat restaurants. Like, think about this. You pay $40, $50 and you can go to a restaurant and sit there and they serve you until you die. Like Steph, if you
Greg wouldn't like that.
He would hate that. He hates that when I talk about that. But it's the fact that if you think about, if somebody presented that to me like 20, 30 years ago, I would think it was like a fantasy, right? So I just think there's so many things today that allow convenience of life. But I think there's no reason for us to be so high stress. And so I understand the world is expensive today. Real estate, housing is expensive. But I think with the convenience and the technology, I do think that we can make very good use. And I think I, you know, whether it be my family or my friends, but I just hate to see people who carry a certain level of weight around their on top of them as they go through life. Because I think life is too short,
Yeah.
and you don't know when your last day will be. And I think every day that you have that sort of stress above you, I do feel it's a wasted day, and it's very unnecessary, because it doesn't really need to be that unfortunate, you know. So I think that's where I'm very passionate to kind of leverage my platform and my story to show people that I'm telling you, like, there's not one right way in life. There's not a certain age you got to do things. There's not a certain way you have to do things. If you wake up every day and you're like so fulfilled and happy, like, honestly, you're already beating 99.9% of the population. Whether you have money, you have no money, you're single, you're not single, whatever it is. Yeah.
Well, and I think what I call Corona time has really taught people is that human interaction is necessary and so important.
Yeah.
And I think, for some introverts, I've heard this is a paradise for me. I just have to stay home. But in general, people do need that
Yeah.
interaction and
Yeah.
being face to face. I mean, this is the best we can have right now. But, just being able to hug your friends and your family, like, that's huge.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. It is a funny time that we're in right now. Like, I think COVID really hit everybody. Like, it hit the whole world. You can't avoid it. And
Yeah.
I think people are transitioning on the fly because we don't know how to prepare for it. And I know that a lot of people, they're having a hard time. Like, like, I think for certain people who like to just sit at home and do nothing, maybe it's paradise for them. But I know for majority, they feel it's very, like, it's every day that goes by, they're like more and more miserable. So it's definitely a very different time that I think no one is prepared for.
It's really how can you connect with people and reach out for help if you need it.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Steph, chatting with you. Yeah,
Yeah, the
it's been.
time went by so fast, and I know you have to run, but I want to thank you so much for being
Thank
on the
you.
show. And don't forget your little friends when you are Brad Pitt status. So.
Oh my God. Oh, don't flatter me. Thank you, though.
All right. Well, I'll talk with you soon.
100%. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Steph.
Take care.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. I am so grateful for having a meaningful conversation today on the Color Success podcast. If you're interested in learning more about our guests, becoming a guest, would like to sponsor a show, and/or learn more about my business, please visit www.drstephaniejwong.com. If you feel like doing an act of kindness, please leave a review to further spread positivity. With gratitude, Stephanie.